Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Foreign Policy's publisher and CEO, Andrew Solinger.
Applause to you. We love a packed room here at FP's Tech and AI Forum. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're very excited to have you here. Apologies to the folks in the back. We are at capacity right now. I promise you it will be worth it. So it's worth standing through. Listen, UNGA80 takes place in the midst of a backdrop of rising trade tensions and protectionism, and that is fragmenting the global landscape. We've got a lot to talk through. We've got a great set of speakers that will talk about differing regulatory strategies that are exacerbating the problem, making it harder to address critical issues like AI development, governing it, investing in digital public infrastructure, how to power AI, the intensive energy demands of AI. We're going to also talk about some of the items that have made their way down the headlines, like the rise of ransomware attacks, which is very prevalent, bridging the digital divide, specifically for the global South, and the impacts on workforce and businesses. So tons to talk through. We bring together decision makers for you that we think will really inform the conversation, and illuminate projects and partnerships that are helping to bridge these divides and solve some of these problems. We're going to be solutions oriented. And I know you've all just eaten also, so we're going to raise the energy level as well and make sure we're perfectly awake, right? Yeah. Okay, great. Housekeeping notes. There are QR codes on your seats. You probably saw those. Those are important. One of the QR codes will lead you to the page for this event, and on it you will see the agenda and all the bios of the speakers and what have you. We're not going to post those up while the folks are speaking, so please do click through on that. Also importantly is a subscription QR code. Show of hands, who here subscribes to FP? Okay, I see a business opportunity here. Thank you for subscribing. If you are a subscriber, my colleague Corinne and her team out at our subscription desk has a really cool set of doodads to hand out, including, while supplies last, a hat that says soft power on the front. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Professor James Nye, the dearly departed, Joseph Nye, dearly departed, coined the term soft power in the pages of Foreign Policy some like 25 years ago. And so we are memorializing him with these hats, and it has a nice FP logo on it. We can also send it to you at your home address. And if you subscribe today, you get a hat. So make sure you go out and see Corinne and her team. We also have reporters on the ground here today publishing a special edition of SITREP, a daily newsletter that'll focus on all the activities here at UNGA, today's speeches, very exciting, which we're also posting on our site. Check those out too. So please subscribe to that. And finally, I'd like to thank our partners, without whom we could not bring all of you together and have such a fantastic program today. So it was made possible with the help of GSMA and SAP, so thank you very much to them. And our supporting partners, which include the Future of Life Institute, MasterCard, the McKinsey Global Institute, who we'll hear from very shortly, Microsoft regulating AI, and ServiceNow. So enough from me. Let's hear the content you really came to listen to. Let's start the program. Thanks.
Please now welcome McKinsey Global Institute Director, Quaylen Ellingrud, for a conversation with journalist Maggie Lake.
Hi, everyone. AI has cut through every conversation we've had so far today. I think it's going to be the case with every event that you go to this week. I'm really curious, before we jump into Quaylen, quick show of hands. When you hear AI, who is filled with fear and trepidation? Okay, couple honest people in this room. Who sees it as opportunity? Okay, that gives us a good read of who's in the room. I'm both, by the way, for full disclosure. And if we're all honest with each other, I think that we feel that way too, especially if you're a parent or operating in business. So I'm really interested, and we're going to set with a very broad stage. I know that you're doing a lot of work on this. How are emerging technologies and frontier technologies, not just AI, but across many of the technological changes we're seeing, how is that going to change marketplaces as we know them?
We think, based on a report called The Next Big Arenas of Competition that we published through McKinsey Global Institute, that there are pockets of the economy that have outsized impact on our lives, but certainly on GDP growth and economic profit. And there's 18 specific arenas, as we call them, that we think are really going to influence up to about a third of global GDP growth. If you're in one of these arenas, you probably know it because it's a lot of change, a lot of competition. If you're not in one of these arenas, I would be careful because either you're going to be disrupted by it or it's your next big opportunity.
And we're talking about AI, robotics, biotechnology, nanotechnology. I'll throw quantum computing in there.
Yeah.
You mentioned the jobs part, and I think that's where a lot of the fear comes in for many people. What do we need to understand about how this is going to change labor market forces and productivity?
Absolutely. I think productivity over time will go up, but there's a lot of disruption and transition in that. And I think both from these 18 arenas, as well as just broader kind of progress, we're all going to need two particular skills in a lot more depth. And this is from CEO on down to your frontline employees. One is technological skills, but not coding, right? Can you interact with technology to understand its impact on your job, on your group, on your company? Can you be a bit of a translator? And the second is social and emotional skills. And this is because they are so complementary with tech and AI, right? The more of that we do of generative AI and other technology, the more we're going to need these quintessentially human elements of showing empathy, leadership, negotiation. And so those are the two skills we all need more of, regardless of role.
Are we prepared for that? I just was speaking to Ravi's editor-in-chief. You'll see him on stage soon. He was asking me, I have a daughter who's a sophomore in college, and is she ready for what's coming at her? No. Are any of us? Are we preparing the labor force for those changes? What are you finding when you look into it?
Yeah, not quickly enough and not enough at scale. I think there are pockets where we're thoughtful about what are the educational kind of programs, what are the skills we need, but not at scale. And that's the challenge of, I think, our generation in this moment. We will have more jobs in the future, and these jobs will be higher paid jobs. They'll be higher skill jobs and require higher education. Now, will those be the skills and the education that we build in the workforce of today? That's a big question, I think the big challenge at this level of scale.
Yeah. I think this is where policymakers, and this is where policy is so important, we're going to be talking about that a lot today. What should they be doing in terms of fostering environments where we are not only growing the technology, but also the people that will help kind of find those solutions and be able to optimize the technology as opposed to being eliminated by it?
Yeah, I think one big thing is what you touched on, which is the education, right? How do policymakers shape how we match the workforce of today to the skill building we need for tomorrow? But also across these 18 arenas, there are magical pivotal moments in time that are kind of the liftoff point. So shared autonomous vehicles is an example right now that is on the cusp. But we need policyholders and policymakers to kind of shape that environment, support the regulation. One of the interesting things we found across these 18 arenas is that they are very geopolitically, we might say, concentrated. About 2/3 of those industries, at least historically, have been in the U.S., right? Many large-scale companies. About 20% of them have been in China, only 5% of them in Europe. Right? And this might be where policymakers, shapers really need to support the growth of those industries so that Europe, the rest of the world, really get their fair share of some of these arenas.
I would imagine that's even more marked when you talk about low to middle income countries. What are the regional differences you're seeing, and what's the gap like? I mean, what is the urgency in terms of policymakers? I'm assuming it's not just on a national level. I'm assuming this is sort of global coordination to help with equity.
Yeah, there could be some global or regional, sort of Middle East, for example, coordination. I think in low and middle income countries, the challenges around education, how do you build the skilled workforce? For example, we know now that the workforce of the next few decades will be in India and in Africa, right? Because these people are already born, they're just growing up or waiting for them to become working age. In Africa, it's highly dispersed, so it's hard to kind of concentrate people in bigger cities and bigger markets for talent. But perhaps with technology, we may be able to kind of harness that in a new way coming forward. So I think the real challenge for low and middle income countries is education and building the skills for the jobs we're going to have in the future.
This is why this week is so important to have these kinds of conversations that cut through these topics, I think, because you need to think of them all together holistically as opposed to in a silo where we could just talk about marketplace changes, but leave out the people part. One of the other issues that comes up a lot, we heard it this morning in energy, and I'm sure we will again, is we know we need to innovate and move quickly. We want to foster this innovation, but what about the safeguards? And again, with AI, I think this is and data, this is an extremely important question.
Absolutely, and I think it gets back to some of the policymaker kind of shaping, but creating the right environment, the right business environment, so that some of these arenas can truly prosper and not hit some of the guardrails and kind of veer off course. And I think those are some of the real kind of extra factors that will either accelerate the development of these arenas, whether it's e-commerce or space or shared autonomous vehicles, or that will kind of hold them back, right? If we don't get the risk guardrails right, and there are, lawsuits and other challenges that kind of take longer to create the business supportive environment, then we're going to have slower development and slower GDP growth.
Are we seeing equal investment in all of these arenas, or if they're important, are there some that are underinvested?
They're at very different levels of maturity. There are some that we caught kind of, on the upswing, right, at that moment of liftoff, shared autonomous vehicles. We talked about space, I would say earlier in that maturity curve, but incredible potential. And then others like e-commerce, AI software, for example, probably farther along in their maturity journey. And some of them, I think many of them, showing some of the three factors that we saw in these arenas. One of them is escalatory investment dynamics. And you see this in the AI space, right? Microsoft spent $80 billion in investment last year. That is astronomical, shifting from a very low capital model, very labor intensive, to a very capital intense model. And you see this in some of the spaces. You also see in the arenas a real transformation of the business model. So think of this like the Blockbuster to Netflix transition or the taxi to Uber transition. Totally different business model that transforms the industry. And then we put a bit of a filter of, is the market large and growing quickly enough? Because just if it's not material, then we're not so excited about it changing both the economy and how we live.
We need to have this sort of lens across as we look. Is there a risk that one area hoards investment or is over-invested in at the expense of others? Do we need to be thinking about all of these arenas equally?
I don't think equally, because as you said, right, we're at different points of maturity, but they do interact a lot. So, there's this question, is there an AI bubble, right? And there's so much investment, so much attention and energy, and there's so much kind of supply right now. Will the demand be there to meet it? And can you really kind of create the market there? So I think there's some that are getting or grabbing outsized attention and investment at the expense of others, because investment goes one place or another, it's fungible. But I think just watching them and the interplay, right? For example, technology and AI in particular interfaces with batteries to create shared autonomous vehicles, right? None of these arenas are independent by themselves. And as you get development in some areas, you see really exciting unlocks in the other arenas.
Yeah, well, which would make sense with AI feeding in, and we could talk about medical and biotechnology as well. It's not mutually exclusive.
Absolutely.
We oftentimes in these conversations talk about public-private partnership. Some of these I can see, like e-commerce being very much in the private sector, but others, do you need to see more public-private, more government involvement? Like something like space seems hard to think about just being solely a private sector endeavor.
There are a couple of arenas that kind of lend themselves to that. Space is a beautiful example. There are others around energy, nuclear fission, for example, or even semiconductors maybe didn't start that way, started more private, and then now through geopolitics has become maybe more of a public-private kind of intersection of policy.
What kind of time frame should we have when you're looking at these arenas? And when we're talking about the disruption coming, is this the next generation workforce? Are we looking further out? How do we need to think about how rapidly these changes are coming?
Yeah, we looked out till 2040, so the next kind of 15 years. But it's not that the change happens then. It happens now, and it's kind of driving all of the GDP growth leading up to that. And we think actually commanding about a third of that global GDP growth. So for sure, a big deal then, and we would say leading up to that in the next 15 years as well.
Something we need to focus our attention on right now. Fantastic way to, I think, set the table for all the conversations we're going to have today that touch on many of these different areas. We can only I'd love to dive into each of these 18. We only have time to sort of plant the flag and give you things to think about as you listen to the next speakers. But if you want any more information, certainly you can go to McKinsey Global Institute and find out. Quaylen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maggie. Appreciate it.
Please welcome to the stage Flutterwave Chief Legal, Regulatory Affairs and Public Policy Officer, Oluwabankole Falade, and FP Director of Strategic Partnerships, Afua Ose.
Thank you, Bankole, for joining us today and for you all here. We're going to talk about Africa, tech, economic growth. Many times when I go to Africa policy events, there are some numbers that we hear all the time. Largest population, the number of young people, leapfrogging in mobile technology. What are the numbers that actually matter? What are you paying attention to at Flutterwave that makes the business case for your growth?
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here. Very good question. So I think I'll start by saying Africa has truly a young population, extremely curious people, early adopters of technology. Curiosity, I think, has been one of our driving forces. It's probably like a natural resource inbred in people in Africa. You find a lot of young people, middle-aged, old people as well, who would question anything, who would adopt technology. One of the greatest drivers of technology in Africa is we've always had the deficit in infrastructure, and technology has filled that gap. So we have truly leapfrogged faster than lots of countries in the West. If you wanted to do a technology evolution diagram, you see that we've taken on a lot of payments and other technology solutions a lot faster than our contemporaries in the West. So Africa is a big market. If you want to invest in the next frontier, I would say it is Africa, and that's what Flutterwave has tried to do. Flutterwave's mission really has been to connect Africa with the rest of the world and connect the rest of the world with Africa. We want to bring African commerce out of Africa to the West, to the rest of the world, and we want to bring big businesses, small businesses as well, who want to connect with the African consumers to Africa. Yeah.
You mentioned an infrastructure gap. And what is the type of infrastructure that Flutterwave has had to build to enable that facilitation of e-commerce? What didn't exist that now exists, and what still needs to be built to further expand?
So, really good question. Where do I start from? Okay, so for every single payment transaction that you experience and you see go instantly, there are probably 500 conversations behind the scenes. There are 10 acquiring banks, 50 switches, all of them just working together to make one transaction go through. When Flutterwave started about 7-8 years ago, one of the greatest challenges we saw was that, look, infrastructure did exist, but it was fragmented. You didn't have interoperable systems speaking to each other. You still have that challenge today, and that's why I think we believe our mission is not done, and we're still working really hard to fulfill that. So what we set out to do was to act as the interoperable layer, try and make varying infrastructure that existed speak to each other, so that consumers like yourself, myself, could just sit down behind my cell phone, your device, and make payments seamlessly, and not have to worry about is my bank branch speaking to, which was the case before, would be if you wanted to withdraw money, you'd have to go to your bank branch. If you were lucky and your bank was advanced where you could do branchless banking, you'd have to go to another branch. And if you get to that other bank branch, there are always little challenges you could face. Would be, is the network up to date? Can my branch speak to can the branch speak to my branch? Can they confirm I have that credit in my accounts? Will they approve the transaction and all of that? So these were the major pain points we found when we started business, and it still exists today. And I'll say companies like Flutterwave, we've simplified this. We've made commerce a lot easier. but I think we've only just scratched the surface, because even as much as we think, we've achieved, you still have a continent that has over 50 countries, 50 payment systems, 50 different regulations, and so that challenge is still there. Yeah.
Can we speak a little bit about operating in so many different markets? If you were starting a business in the U.S., yes, of course, states may have different legal regulations, but there's one federal system, and you all operate in so many different countries, so many different languages. What has that process been like, engaging with government officials, helping policymakers understand what it is that you all are trying to do and establish that interoperability across markets?
Well, it's been very tough, very challenging, but also very rewarding at the same time. I think success for people like myself, and I think a lot of my colleagues, is when we see and hear stories from some of the merchants we've helped to build their businesses, when they're able to make payments, cross-border payments, for example, and you sitting in your room in Lagos or in Accra, and you've got something on your website, and someone in Lagos or in Kenya, for example, sees it and likes it and is able to make payment to you, you're able to ship that item, they get it. I mean, those success stories are, I think, what I would call the dividends of the hard work we've seen. It's been extremely difficult because even within what you would call regional economic blocks, which we do have in Africa, in East Africa, you've got the EAC community, West Africa, you've got ECOWAS, Southern Africa, you've got SADC. Even within those regional blocks, you still have different rules. Flutterwave, if I could use as our own example, for every market where we today support payments, we've had to go in, set up a local entity, which is incorporate a local company, hire local staff, have a local board of directors, sign agreements with local merchants, apply for a license. All of this takes a lead time of 3 to 7 years in some cases before you get through the final licensing stage and you're actually able to commence commercial operations. That's really, really difficult. Big businesses or mid-sized businesses like ours might be able to withstand that much pressure, but it hasn't helped with, small entrepreneurs, small businesses, people looking to start up. You got a great innovative idea and you want to start up. It's extremely difficult. And one of the things we've always advocated for is harmonization of these various regimes. And we're beginning to see use cases now come up. I think earlier this year, Ghana signed an MOU with Rwanda to allow passporting. Passporting, is similar to what you find in the EU, where if I'm registered or licensed in one EU member state and I decide I wanted to move to another EU member state to offer the same type of business, it's almost automatic. It's just a notification to let them know I'm now in this new country. I don't have to go through that whole regime. I know the EAC community is beginning to have those conversations in the last 2 years as well about creating a regional framework where if I am licensed in Uganda, I can do business in Tanzania. I'll give you an example. In the EAC, we're licensed in Uganda, we're licensed in Tanzania, we're licensed in Rwanda. This is a painful journey of 3 to 7 years in each different markets. And in West Africa, it's the same thing, licensed in Ghana, licensed in Nigeria, in Francophone Africa, licensed in Senegal, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, and always having to have the same. Well, I think one of the greatest challenges is that the rules might be similar, but they're not the same. So it's a different set of requirements I need to fulfill. So it's not even about having one template, one framework where when I put together an application pack, I could just pick up that pack, change the names, country names and details, and take it to another jurisdiction. So it's a big challenge, and I'm hoping that as part of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, it would be one of the things that would be resolved to enable, cross-border business and make Africa feel a lot more like home, which is what one of our slogans, our commitments to our merchants, is that we try to make Africa feel like home, as like one country for you. So you're not worried about, integrating for payments in Nigeria and doing a separate integration in Ghana, doing a separate integration in South Africa, if you use Flutterwave. So that's really what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, you said 3 to 7 years. I said, we got to end this on a positive note. We have to have some inspiration. Part of your work is also helping African entrepreneurs and businesses export and to reach global markets. So can you speak a little bit about that process in helping entrepreneurs who want to accept payments, accept dollars, accept euro, and be able to expand outside of Africa?
So we've got a lot of, beautiful stories, like I said earlier, about, those testimonials are heartwarming and, make you want to get up in the morning every day to keep doing what you're doing. So we've got what I'll call our secret sauce is the single API integration. So we've given you one API with which you can accept payments if you're on Flutterwave, while at the background, we've got people working hard, like myself, running from one market to the other, speaking to policymakers, applying for licenses. You've got my colleagues in expansion, speaking to different banks, different fintechs, partnerships. I think in Flutterwave, we think partnership is extremely important. We don't really see, what we do as competitive, but we'd rather work with local partners, local fintechs, and, just to try and make sure that ultimately the consumer benefits, you're able to make payments with that single API. So with the single API on your Flutterwave dashboard, you're sitting down wherever you are in the world, wherever we are active, people could come, source goods from you, and you don't have to worry about payments. So you could focus your energies on other things like, logistics. If I take an order from Ghana, how do I fulfill that? Which is the next layer, I think, of commerce in Africa, in that, once payments is solved, and then we can, solve other things like logistics, infrastructure, and then, we'll have a massive highway for commerce across the continent. Yeah.
My final quick question. This room is full of policymakers, leaders, innovators. What is your message to them about doing business and growing and scaling across Africa? Should they do it?
Yeah, I think if you're really serious about business, I think Africa is the new frontier, current frontier. I think the next growth is going to come out of Africa. I think we're already seeing that today with what companies like my company is doing and what a lot of other companies are doing. African governments as well today are a bit more open to conversations. They're actually actively encouraging companies and foreigners to come in to do business. So Africa has changed and is changing for the better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please now welcome to the stage Danish Tech Ambassador Anne-Marie Engtoft Middelgaard and Microsoft President of Global Affairs Lisa Monaco for a conversation with FP's Senior Vice President of Research, Dr. Maisha Alam.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here in New York and to our global audience online. It's a distinct honor for me to have an opportunity to moderate this conversation on ransomware, which is the fastest growing cybercrime threat. And it's a particularly timely discussion to have because, as some of you may know, just yesterday, several airports across Europe had their operations severely disrupted because of ransomware attacks that debilitated operating systems. And so thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for joining us for this conversation. This conversation is also an opportunity to launch the latest installment in a multi-year, multi-component report that my team at FP Analytics, the Independent Research Division of Foreign Policy, has been producing in partnership with Microsoft now for several years, called Digital Frontlines. And I encourage everybody, both in the room as well as online, to take a look at the new research that we've published, as well as the contributions from some of the experts on the stage here. So let's dive right in. And Lisa, I'd love to start with you. As I just mentioned, this is the fastest growing cybercrime threat. So from your vantage point, how has the ransomware threat landscape evolved in recent years, especially in this era of heightened geopolitical competition and fragmentation? And what are you seeing as the impacts of that changing landscape?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be here with Anne-Marie, who feels like just yesterday, or maybe a couple weeks ago, we sat in Copenhagen together which I think is an example of how close the partnerships and the coordination and collaboration needs to be between the private sector, governments, civil society. But it's really great to be here, and I want to thank Foreign Policy for the platform that is provided for this research. And it's really important to get this information out to a broader set of policymakers, experts from national security issues, not just to have the cyber geeks talking to the cyber geeks. With all due respect to the cyber geeks. So to your question, I think what we're seeing and what the research shows is ransomware is the fastest growing threat that we're seeing. It has changed from our vantage point, both in volume and in kind. So what do I mean by that? In volume, it's quite clear. 5-fold increase in ransomware attacks over the last 5 years. And all sectors are being impacted. Nobody is immune. But to what you opened this session with, what we are seeing is an increase in attacks against healthcare sector and critical infrastructure. So the attacks, as you said, against the airports are just a reminder and reinforce why we need to focus on this, not just as a matter of cybercrime, and I don't say that to diminish it as a matter of cybercrime, but as a national security issue. It is a resilience issue. It is a critical infrastructure issue, and we need to be treating it that way as private sector, as industry, as governments, as multilateral organizations. We're here during High Level Week. This is an issue of international security and peace. It's also changed in kind. And so what I mean by that is we have seen, and I've seen this over the course of my career. I spent a career in government and national security and law enforcement and public safety. And what I've seen is the evolution of ransomware from being kind of a isolated for-profit focus to now being a massive ecosystem, right? Yes, with geopolitical implications, but as I said, resilience and national security implications. It's now become a platform and an area where criminal actors, malicious actors of all types, including nation-state driven or tolerated or supported actors, who have at their disposal a ecosystem. So the ransomware as a service approach is really lowering the barrier to entry for malicious actors of all types. So you can now, and I don't advise this to any of the folks in the audience, but you can go and get a full toolkit to conduct a ransomware attack, everything from malware, instructions, ability to use crypto, and tech support, right? So we're in a world where malicious actors are getting customer service and tech support to do these attacks, and that is a really bad situation. And so that's why I think we need to come together as industry, private sector, working with governments, working with law enforcement, working with civil society. And I think we'll get to this, but we need to raise the costs and consequences.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I appreciate so many of the points you made, and there's a few things I'd love to unpack in this conversation, but just two things. The first, in terms of driving home the point about the targeting of critical infrastructure, of public services, and really systemic disruptions, but also to your point that governments can not only no longer afford to ignore this changing landscape, but that they have a critical role to play. And so, Anne-Marie, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. You are in this unique position as Denmark's tech ambassador, engaging with governments through diplomacy and also through industry. And thank you for the contribution that you've made to the report in which you discuss some of these issues. But I'd love to ask you specifically, you know, as ransomware groups operate across borders, as Lisa was saying, what role can diplomacy and international cooperation play when it comes to building stronger collective defenses? And as Denmark holds the EU presidency, how does cyber and how do these issues fit into that agenda?
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me start by giving you an honest answer, and then I'll give you the diplomatic answer afterwards. I think the honest answer, it feels like whack-a-mole. I mean, so many of you here are working on this. We've done public-private partnerships. We've been partnering with the U.S. Government. I was about to point to you, but now you're Microsoft. But with Microsoft as well in the Countering Ransomware Initiative, 70 countries, an unprecedented organization that's been moving fast. We've been agile. We've been thinking around how to use the full breadth of deterrence. And still, we see the cost of ransomware going up. Speaking about airports, the Copenhagen airport closed for 5 hours last night because of an unidentified drone that was circling around. So this idea that we've been talking hypothetically about living in a hybrid warfare time, it's not theoretical anymore. It is very much a lived reality. And so in this lived reality, it does feel like whack-a-mole. The diplomatic answer is great to be at UNGA and working with all of you on the public-private partnerships to tailor this. I think that is the long-term answer, right? I think partly it is for us, and this is part of our EU presidency priorities, it is to strengthen deterrence and have the courage and the collaboration to use the full breadth of that. Mm-hmm. And so that is not only attributions, it is also sanctions. And I am delighted to see that what we call the cyber diplomacy toolbox in the EU, also known as deterrence, we are using the full breadth of that toolbox more and more. We're working with partners, especially with private sector, on information sharing and on realizing that this is a shared challenge. And the more information you share, the easier it is for us to go from attributions to sanctions to prosecutions. And we have to go down that route. Secondly, increasing the collaboration, I think it's important. It's not only transactional. And we talked about this, Mayesha. I actually think of all the engagements I have with the tech industry, the one where we have the most like-mindedness, it's on cyber. This is really where the cost is really felt by both parties. The eagerness to find the public-private partnership and the collaboration is certainly there. You help us with information and by backing our ability to then serve as governments in the sanctions and in the sort of broader aspect of deterrence. And then the third thing is that while we play whack-a-mole and all this, AI, in sort of in addition to the wonderful services that you meant, please do not do this at home. But AI is just going to, I think, really increase the opportunity on the bad side, in sort of bad actor side. And so we got to think long and hard, how do we harness the new power of AI to make sure that this is not another tool to accelerate ransomware, but that it's used to deter it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. And I appreciate your emphasis on public-private partnerships, and I want to come back to that in a minute. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the international policy frameworks and initiatives that are underway. You mentioned the Countering Ransomware Initiative. And so this is a question for both of you, which is, I'd love to hear your assessment of international initiatives, whether it's through the UN Open-Ended Working Group, the International Countering Ransomware Initiative, the UN Convention Against Cybercrime. There are initiatives underway. And so tell us a little bit about, what you see as some of the strengths of those, as well as the weaknesses, and especially as relates to denying safe haven, something that you touched on, Lisa. And so maybe I'll go to you first and then Anne-Marie.
So I couldn't agree more with Anne-Marie on the need for us to come together. And I do think this is an area of very much like-mindedness. I saw it when I was in government, and I see it now at Microsoft. So the tools that you mentioned, the frameworks that you mentioned, are all tools that we need to use, right? The thing that I have seen be incredibly effective is joint sequenced operations, where international governments and law enforcement agencies are working with the private sector, aided by the type of information that Anne-Marie mentioned, to come together to have maximum impact, to undertake disruptions, to really deny the infrastructure or incapacitate the infrastructure that is fueling the ecosystem that I mentioned. But the international community needs to work together to hold accountable those countries that don't live up to their obligations, right? So you talked about the UN principles here about the obligation that nation states have not to let their countries and their territory be used by malicious actors to engage in malicious cyber activity emanating from those countries. And if countries are not willing to live up to those obligations and enforce those and live by those frameworks, then there needs to be consequences. We should move to a world in which we're singling out and we're calling out the failure of countries to live up to those obligations. And it may well be time to say, that is a state sponsor of ransomware, right? To use these types of frameworks to hold accountable and to assess accountability and consequences in these from these multilateral bodies, because as Anne-Marie said, the trajectory is not going in the right direction.
Yeah, Anne-Marie.
These days in New York, there's a big focus on upholding fundamental values that are very dear to Denmark, that's very dear to the European Union on international law, the International Framework for Human Rights, obviously the Framework for Responsible State Behavior in Cyberspace. And while these agreements and the talks here, I don't think they are making the ransomware actors necessarily, it's not a scare tactic. They don't think, ooh, they talked in New York around upholding these norms. But I think it is important for what we are standing on here and to make sure that when we do those partnerships, they are meaningful and they have an anchor in a globally agreed language. That's why we've been delighted to see the global mechanism as a follow-up to the open-ended working group. That's why we're working both in the very multilateral, in the plurilateral, so like the Countering Ransomware Initiative. I do want to add two things that I think are critical if we're going to succeed with this. One, capacity building, and that is both domestically and abroad. Most of my law enforcement, they are not cyber experts. And so when we ask law enforcement to help us address this risk, they don't know what to do, because this is not how we've been training our police officers for most of the past century. And so we got to think about what are the necessary capacity building at home. And then secondly, what is the necessary capacity building abroad? Because if it's only a few states that are doing this, and if we don't have all the countries with whom we do business, where we operate, where our organizations are active, we're going to miss. And then the weak link is going to be what breaks the chain. And so capacity building while upholding important norms in the work that we do here in New York, I think it's essential to get to a place where we are actually more efficient in our deterrence.
This is such an important point. I mean, when I was in government and now in the private sector, there isn't a threat or an attack that doesn't have an international dimension, and there's not a impactful, consequential response or disruption operation that doesn't have an international dimension and international partnership. Microsoft right now has investigators sitting with Europol, right, to undertake these types of disruptive operations. And to Anne-Marie's point, yes, it can be whack-a-mole, but we can have substantial impact when we work together, do these joint sequenced operations like we did with the Luma information stealer disruption, like we did with the Raccoon 0365 disruption. So these can have real impact, but if we are going to get past whack-a-mole, we've got to address this safe haven problem, because that's where the malicious actors go to avoid prosecution, to evade consequences.
And to reconstitute,
and
even when there are responses.
That's right.
Well, and not just that, but going back to something you said, Anne-Marie, it may not seem like having a conversation like this will deter the malicious actors, and maybe it won't, but it does keep the issue on the global agenda insofar as what you said, Lisa, this is a peace and security issue, and it's important that we pay attention to it. But I would say, to add to that, it's also important for those who are targeted, the victims of these attacks, to know that we're paying attention and that the international community cares. This is something that Francesca Bosco of the Cyber Peace Institute has written about in this installment of the report, and I encourage you to take a look at it. But yes, of course.
And I think for our citizens in my own country, I mean, this is targeting our critical digital infrastructure, and that is tied very much to us delivering on the democratic principles of a state like Denmark. And so if we're not talking about the rule of law and upholding the norms that we've been negotiating here, we're losing, I think, the legitimacy to actually confront our citizens and saying, what are we going to do? Because it has a huge cost on them and the services they're about to also receive.
Absolutely. And to your point, Lisa, you said there's no issue nowadays that doesn't have an international dimension. And, you were Deputy Attorney General previously, prior to that, Homeland Security Advisor. There's also no issue, I would say, that no longer has, or that doesn't have a digital dimension,
Absolutely.
right? Every security issue now has a digital dimension, and as you said, an international dimension. And so understanding the relationships and those linkages is really important.
And critical for that partnership to come together. I mean, there are many threats that I've dealt with in my former roles where the private sector had less to offer to disrupt those threats. Not so when it comes to the cyber realm and the cyber threat. And that's why it takes all of us, private sector, governments, law enforcement, civil society, to come together.
Absolutely. And in that spirit of coming together, both of you have emphasized the important role of public-private partnerships. And in the remaining time that we have, I want to ask you, and this is a question again for both of you, maybe I'll go to Anne-Marie first this time and then end with Lisa, which is, can you share a couple of examples of what effective coordination looks like in practice? And what do you hope to see change to improve upon that coordination?
First of all, we went from high-level conversations a few years ago with the private sector to now having who to call when something happens. I think the JCDC that CISA created here in the U.S. really served as a model for many of governments around the world and said, well, we do not have the same. I know who to call in Microsoft now. And the Center for Cybersecurity in Denmark knows who to call. And that has changed dramatically because then it goes from being a political engagement to a operational collaboration. And I think that has really been tremendous. Together with Australia, I co-chair the group of like-minded tech and cyber ambassadors from around 40 countries, and there is a focus on how do we accelerate both the operational, the strategic engagement, so that is what do we do on the day-to-day basis, while at the same time, where do we need to go? And I think these are two examples that are really good. The challenge to all of this is that we are living in a time where this requires a global response, but the world is tainted to some degree by regionalization. That is going to be a challenge for us. Secondly, there is a transactional piece to some of the partnerships right now that we need to overcome to sustain the trusted partnership that this requires. And so these are two things, not to, I think, leave us on a negative note, but I think it's just a realization of how the world is operating these days and figuring out how to overcome.
Look, I think what works and what has worked in the past, joint sequenced operations, rapid information sharing, coming together, literally sitting side by side, as I said, with us in Europol, me having a counterpart here, a tech ambassador that I can talk to, and similar roles in other countries. That's what it's going to take to continue to make progress and to work together against this very difficult problem. I've seen, though, what success can look like. And so I'm optimistic about what we can do.
Fantastic. Well, I can't think of a better note to end this conversation. Again, to everybody, if you're interested in learning more, I invite you to visit digitalfrontlines.io and check out the report. Lisa, Anne-Marie, thank you for your leadership and thank you for being here today.
Thanks.
Next, please welcome ServiceNow Vice President and Global Head of Government Affairs and Public Policy, Nick Zitzin, and Serbian Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Marko Đurić, for a conversation with FP's Rishi Iyengar.
All right. Well, packed house. Clearly, a lot of interest in this topic. So thank you for your interest and thank you for joining us here. Great to have you both. Minister, I wanted to start with you. We're talking about kind of private-public partnership and in AI. How do you see the public side of that? How does Serbia think about, and how do you think about incorporating AI into governance, into the economy, all these big questions that every country is grappling with?
First of all, thank you for inviting me, and what a great pleasure to be here in front of this crowd. What an incredible time we live in. I think the only parallel that can be made regarding the impact of these new technologies to our society is probably the effect the Gutenberg press had on societies many centuries ago. And it's something that brings incredible possibilities, both to our economies, to ordinary people, but it definitely brings also a number of challenges. In our part of the world, in Serbia, for example, we are trying to prepare for this era by increasing the number of people who understand what AI is about. That's one of the reasons why we introduced a subject called Digital World to our elementary schools. So already first graders in all of our elementary schools have this subject in order to get acquainted. In 5th and 6th grades, we have computer coding as a compulsory subject. And we are hopeful that by expanding the number of students in our universities who study tech and AI, we will be able to keep the pace. Of course, I should also probably mention that IT and software, part of which the AI has overtaken agriculture in the share of our GDP and is now around 15% of the GDP. By the way, that's one of the reasons why the United States has become our #1 partner when it comes to services, because many US companies outsource their work to Serbia, but also some Serbian companies do their work here. So as a government, we try not to interfere very much. We are trying to create an environment conducive for these technologies to develop, but also to contribute to a global discussion. This is why we were competing very strongly to become this year's chairs of the Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence. And a couple of months ago, we organized a major conference in Belgrade with more than 500 participants from 70 countries within this OECD framework, who then discussed various policy and regulatory aspects and even adopted a Belgrade Declaration on this topic. We are in principle very much in favor of an inclusive approach, which will mean that nations and social actors from across the board should be included in the discussion. But in our case, we are not regulating very much thus far. We are trying to be very open for business, and we are in the middle of Europe, but we are not members of the European Union, which means that we do not fall under Brussels regulatory framework, which is, well, a blessing and a curse, some would say. But it definitely attracts a lot of businesses in this field into Serbia. And finally, I would like to mention that we are working within my ministry to soon introduce an AI consular assistant so that we can reduce waiting times and reduce bureaucratic hurdles for ordinary citizens. And our neighboring Albania has recently announced that they appointed an AI minister, a government minister. We'll see how that goes, but we'll be watching closely. It's definitely a good PR move.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, Nick, you had a software company which uses AI a lot and with a big kind of global presence. But since we are on a panel with the Serbian foreign minister, I want to ask, what does your presence in Serbia look like right now?
It's growing, I hope, with your help. We're actually very committed to the Serbian market, Foreign Minister, and I would say the customers we have there and the customers we're working to build relationships with have given credit to the government for its convening power, for bringing the voices together like you described. One of the biggest AI events is actually happening in Serbia, as you mentioned. So we see the transformation that's happening. We have a good business there, and we'd like to grow it. So I'll leave it there because that's a nice little soundbite that I could send to the team in Serbia and say, I said this in front of the foreign minister.
Right, not to put you on the spot, but yeah.
Thank you very much. You don't have to say it. They will anyhow. But what I wanted also to mention, if I may jump in for a second, is we were able to more than double the size of the GDP of Serbia in less than 1 decade. And one of the reasons is AI and new technologies. And the current market, global market for AI is expected to grow almost 8 times by 2030. So imagine what kind of a leap this technology can bring to countries like Serbia that have been economically lagging behind more developed Western European countries like the Netherlands or, I don't know, Germany for that matter.
Right. So you touched upon something I wanted to ask you about, which is that Serbia is not a member of the EU, but you're trying to be in the process, and the EU, of course, has some of the furthest forward regulations of AI, of tech in general. When you think about your own approach to regulation, which sounds like is pretty light touch, are you doing it with the perspective that you might eventually have to change tack and conform to Brussels regulations, or how are you thinking about that?
That's a very delicate question for Serbia because, you know, our foreign policy for many centuries now, from the times of the Nemanjić dynasty, and I'm talking about 12, 19, and so forth, the establishment of the Serbian church, our policy was that we are the West in the East and the East in the West. And this continues to this very day. We are a truly independent small nation. And just to depict in concrete terms what that means that we are currently the only European nation that has free trade agreements with Europe, Eurasian bloc, meaning Russia plus, an active free trade agreement with China, which is incredible. Also with some Middle Eastern countries like Egypt, the UAE, and so forth. At the same time, we have strategic partnership with the United States in things like energy, and we're expanding. Last month, together with Secretary Rubio, I announced a strategic partnership and strategic dialogue between Serbia and the United States. So we are making big steps to bring our two countries closer. And I think this makes Serbia uniquely positioned to actually serve as a hub for innovation and for businesses. We have 4 new tech parks. We have a biotech center, $500 million worth that the government is building. And we've done a lot to make sure that US companies come as well. And for example, I'll tell you that companies such as Microsoft, Google, NCR has a campus which is bigger than their campus in Atlanta in Belgrade. Microsoft has its regional R&D center in Belgrade, and so forth and so forth. So, and our data storage center in the city of Kragujevac is used for companies across the board precisely because it doesn't fall under Brussels regulatory framework. So that would be my attempt to give you a concise answer how this is reflecting.
Right. But so what I'm hearing is it's a we'll see.
Exactly.
Right. So I wanted to use all that context you laid out to maybe ask you another potentially sort of tricky question. You said that you have a free trade agreement and a good relationship with China. You have a strategic partnership with the US. How do you navigate this question when it comes to AI of that many countries around the world are navigating, of whether to embrace the US tech stack or the Chinese tech stack? Is it that binary? How do you kind of think about that?
That's really a tough one. What I can tell you is that we base our decision-making process on strict adherence to our own national interests, which means that we fully understand where we are. We are part of Europe. We are closely allied with many countries, including the United States in our broader region. But at the same time, we want to serve as a bridge to some other parts of the world. So for our own citizens, for our own institutions, we pick what we assess is the best at a given time and at a given moment. And to jump quickly back to your last question, until we are formal members of the European Union, which we do not know how and when this will happen, because it doesn't depend exclusively on us, and Europe is a bit in a turmoil, and the decision-making process on the future of Europe is very complex. But we do not have any obligation to do anything other than to conduct policies in our own interest, formal obligations. Of course, there are always political pressures, which are not easy, but we are used to it. We've made it for so many centuries, and we plan to continue.
I'll give you a bit of a break.
And keep asking him the questions. Those are hard.
But Nick, I wanted to ask you about sort of as a large company, how do you approach the private side of the private-public partnership? What do you go into? What's the mindset and the message with which you go into conversations with regulators around the world?
Well, I think the important thing to stress is that the technology is changing very quickly. The compute power is increasing, the application of AI is changing, and it is extremely difficult for governments around the world to regulate it. You can always count on the commercial marketplace to concentrate on what's technically exciting. And I think we use our collaboration with governments to balance that with what's good for society. I can tell you in this moment, and as we discussed backstage, everybody wants to talk about AI. And we have, I think, as a society, put AI into a single bucket when it is anything but that. And for every person in the context of what we think it will do for the world wants to talk about AI, okay, AI has been around for decades. You had basic computational AI that was good at pattern recognition and could do calculations faster than people. Then we, with the first GPT model, had generative AI, which basically just turns it into a human language so you can converse with it. And now we have agentic AI, which is when the AI can actually do things that are non-deterministic, meaning we don't know which way it's going to go, it's going to problem solve. What exactly do we want any combination of those technologies to do to make people's lives better? And as private industry, we can't make those determinations. That's a values determination. That belongs in the public policy domain. And I think the other thing that's important to note is that we have a major trust problem around AI. I think we have allowed AI to become a proxy for what we're going to take away from people, as opposed to what we're going to do with it to improve people's lives. And I think governments have a unique capacity to reset the discussion in a way that will allow people to see their own future as users and benefactors from artificial intelligence, and to map the deployment of AI to existing public goals that are established by nations and in many cases by coalitions of nations. So we're effectively counting on those public-private partnerships to put shape around this so that industry doesn't get so carried away with what's cool and gets more concentrated on how can we do this in a way that people actually point to it and say, we actually learned the lessons of past technological evolutions. We actually did this in a way that helped people.
And Minister, you said that Serbia's approach has been to let the private sector kind of develop the way it sees fit. But are there certain areas? Are there any areas where you see government having to draw some lines, and where are those lines?
We will try to be very light on the regulatory side. I don't want these words to sound menacing, but the genie is out of the bottle, and there's no going back, definitely. I mentioned already the effects of the Gutenberg press on societies hundreds of years ago, and how they enabled the broad masses to acquire the amount of information which was unthinkable for that era. Now we are faced with new types of technology and new types of connections between people combined with these new technologies, which will alter the way our societies function. But as you said, we will always keep deeply rooted in ourselves the values that have been carried from one generation to another, and that we need to learn how to uphold and further develop in these modern times. So I think we should walk hand in hand with the technology rather than try to suppress it, because it will never work. But on the other hand, I believe that if we use it the right way, it can really contribute to resolving many of the issues we have.
May I add one point? I agree very much with what the foreign minister is saying. If you think about the financial crisis, you had financial systems that were very heavily regulated, but ordinary people who had absolutely no ability to understand the incredible complexity of the vehicles they were using. And so all the focus on regulation, to your point, did not protect people from the inherent complexity when the system ultimately ran the risk of collapse. So I think in this case, the genie is 100% out of the bottle. I'm going to use that for the rest of the week. People need to be encouraged to learn it, to experiment with it, to recognize how it will change their jobs. And if we can use these public-private partnerships to help people feel confident that they have the resources to do that, then again, you'll end up with a far more equitable and scalable deployment of these technologies, as opposed to isolated cases of success and pervasive failure.
Well, we could keep talking, but we're pretty much at time. So that is a note of private-public camaraderie to end on, I guess. So thank you so much, everyone. Please join me in giving our panelists a big round of applause.
Next, please welcome Future of Life Institute Executive Director and Board Treasurer, Dr. Anthony Aguirre, and the Singapore Ministry of Digital Development and Information Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer, Dr. He Rui-min, for conversation with FP's Global Technology Reporter, Rishi Iyengar.
I hope you guys aren't sick of me yet. So we, as we discussed in the previous panel, so much of AI is about stakeholders and partnerships. One aspect of that, of course, as we saw, is the private and the public. But there's also the aspect of government-to-government cooperation, and represented here, government to academia and civil society, that kind of cooperation. So, Rui-min, I wanted to start with you. Just if you could also kind of set the scene for us about how Singapore thinks about and approaches its own AI development and this question of kind of cooperation.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. Great to be here. Singapore's a small country. 670 something square kilometers at low tide, and a population of 6 million people with declining birth rate. So the opportunities to use technology in general to augment our productivity must be first and foremost in our minds, right? So particularly for artificial intelligence, if it can increase the productive capacity of our people, if it can increase the competitiveness of our economies, if it can then transcend demographic and geographical limitations, I think we need to use it. And I think that's really the starting point. And the question is, how do you use it? It must be a technology that is, number one, widely diffused across the economy. Otherwise, you're not going to get the benefits across society. But it also must be a technology that people feel confident and confident users of it, right? They need to be confident but discerning users of AI. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. I think that sets the context of what we are trying to do. Obviously, because we are a small country that does not produce many of the models, and we don't have a monopoly over the production of it, the data centers, the data, international cooperation, international cooperation, regional cooperation becomes extremely important. And I think that's where we start.
Anthony, I wanted to bring you in and ask about kind of how do you sort of approach this question of not just the development but also the guardrails that need to be placed around AI? Of course, there's a lot of hype but also a lot of fear. How do you advocate sort of striking that balance between the two?
Yeah, I mean, AI is a technology that rivals any in the past, and it's how powerful and important it's going to be. And I think we're only seeing, there's talk about the genie being out of the bottle, but I think we've only got like an ear maybe or a toe of the genie out of the bottle compared to where things are going. And so I think we have to think, how are we going to reap these benefits for society by making powerful tools? But we have to have real agreements and real capabilities in terms of global security, because we're just not going to reap the benefits if things go awry and if people don't feel safe and if they don't feel like they can trust the systems. So we've been thinking about what are the building blocks for real global security at an international level. And we've talked about 7, and maybe I won't go through all 7, but a couple of crucial ones I think are red lines. Like there are things that we just should not have AI systems doing, like helping anybody build weapons of mass destruction, or recursively self-improving or replicating outside of control, or any very powerful AI system that we can't control, or mass persuasion or manipulation intentionally. Like we should not be building these things. And how exactly is that going to happen? We have to have norms, but also some teeth internationally. And some of the norms, I think, are maybe starting. We had the Red Lines in AI campaign that launched, I think, yesterday with 150 plus Nobel Prize winners and 50 other organizations, signatories, and many other prominent global leaders. So I think there's a real consensus that we need red lines. We need to figure out what they are. But we also need to figure out how those are going to be adjudicated and defined and enforced and verified and things like that. So there are a bunch of other elements, like what are the technological standards and agreements? What are the safety standards that we hold companies to? And how do those have teeth and not just be at the totally voluntary level? What are the institutions we build? What are the emergency measures that we have in place? And what are the technical verification mechanisms that we can build, which are, interestingly, in AI, some are available that haven't been available with other previous powerful technologies. So there's lots to work with, but we sort of have to get really busy, right? Like really soon.
Right. And how do you, Raymond, how do you approach sort of the various different partnerships with obviously the private sector, with civil society? Where does Singapore sort of incorporate all of these different voices in AI development? And a similar question to what the Serbian minister said, to what extent do you think about really actively regulating the technology?
Yeah, I'll respond to what Antonio said. Any international governance regime for AI needs to recognize a few things. Number one, different countries have very different needs and requirements. There are certainly many countries in the world where they don't have access to electricity, let alone compute and the internet, and they want to do their best to not miss out on the use of AI. And I think and at the same time, you also have many other countries that are much further along on the development path, and their concerns are different. There are obviously shared concerns around misuse and misinformation. I think those things need to matter. So any notion of governance, any notion of partnerships needs to take into account that diversity of context, right? Internationally amongst different countries, but also recognizing that, back to your question, different, whether it's an NGO, whether it's a private sector organization, we need to find a way to make it work. And I think that must start from that. We also need to recognize that the governance of AI needs to be recognized that it is ultimately a technology that must sit in a set of applications. The model can be the model, but then the use of these individual applications, whether it's for healthcare, whether it's for code assistance, makes a difference in terms of where the risk reward trade-offs are, makes a difference of the risk. And then therefore, I think going for each conversation with that empathy and that humility that people have different worries, I think that must be a starting point for any collaboration.
Right. And there have been a lot of analogies, kind of on both sides of the hype and fear kind of cycle we were talking about earlier. One comparison that has been made a lot, including at the UN, is the analogy of AI, regulating AI the way you sort of regulate nuclear. Do you think that is the most appropriate analogy, or what do you see as the best framework for sort of understanding the guardrails and the governance around AI?
Yeah, it's hard. It's an unprecedented technology, so I think it's hard to draw a strict analogy. I think there are aspects where it is like nuclear weapons in the sense that if you're talking about building an uncontrollable, smarter than human machine, then you're talking about something that is a security risk to everybody. Like, that is everybody's problem, and the level of sort of security and governance that you would need to deal with systems that are that powerful does put them in the category of nuclear weapons. At the same time, this is a technology that, for the most part, is generating like just incredibly useful tools that people want to have, and that in principle, if they're designed correctly and designed in a trustworthy way, can empower many, many people and bring huge economic development. So you don't want to like treat every app like nuclear weapons, right? This is not a workable. So how do we work out the right apparatus for governance that leaves the powerful AI tools that people actually want, that are built for a purpose, that are used for scientific discovery, that are helping people coordinate better, that are helping all kinds of environmental stewardship things. We want to let those run free at some level and encourage those to be designed in a trustworthy and beneficial way, but we don't want to treat them like nuclear weapons. On the other hand, we can't treat the AI industry unlike every other industry and say that even though you're building incredibly dangerous, potentially dangerous technologies, we're just going to leave you to like work out the safety stuff on your own, and maybe you can report to us every once in a while, and if something goes catastrophically bad, then maybe somebody will sue you. Like, this is not a recipe for a good industry, and no other industry works that way when they're building things that powerful. So I think we have to do both. We have to come up with different analogies for different aspects of it, and I think we can. Like, I think technically there certainly are ways to think about what are where is most of the risk coming from in these very powerful systems, especially I think in autonomy. As we build more and more autonomous systems that are much more difficult to predict and control, there's going to be a lot more risk in that, and those have to be treated differently than something that is just recognizing an image and like helping you do like categorize your family photos. We don't need regulation of that. So lots of analogies, but I think that one is appropriate for the most powerful and especially autonomous systems.
I think it's not helpful to think of the world as two camps, right? There are people who want to use AI and the people who are worried about AI. In fact, I certainly fall in the camp that to use AI, you need to put on the guardrails, right? In fact, to drive fast, you need good seatbelts. And we want to be, I know very consciously when I look at individual applications of AI within the government, that it just takes one or two bad incidents and you destroy the entire deployment agenda. And so to the extent that we recognize that there's actually a lot of common ground between the different camps, what's important then is to bring everybody together. We try to do our little part. We organized the Singapore Conference on AI, invited SLI, and they have a great partner for us. But I think these conversations of people recognizing that there's much common interest, whether, depending on whatever camp you belong in, whether you're government, industry, or academia, I think that's been a very useful starting point.
Right. So you mentioned that like you need good seatbelts, and a part of that is how these models, these applications are trained in the first place. And I'm interested to get your perspective, just given what I'm sure everyone here knows, like what a data-driven society Singapore is, and data-driven country. How do you think about sort of managing that the kind of data that goes into AI and the sort of question of like citizens' data and protecting, preserving, safeguarding that?
There is data and there's data. There is data that is useful to train a model, and that you really want as much data as you can. In fact, many countries want their data to be in the training corpus of a model. In fact, we're helping Southeast Asian countries extract data from data that's not digitized so that their voices, their cultures, their language can be well represented. And I think we've done that extensively to make it open source so that the world can benefit. I think that's completely safe. Then the other type of data is really about national security, that's about citizen personal data protection. I think those you want to treat just very differently, right? So those you make sure that it's in an air-gap environment, you make sure you anonymize it. But actually those data is not really useful for training the large language models in the first place. And so to the extent that we do not confound these conversations, I think we have a practical way forward.
And I want to put a question to both of you, since after all we are at the UN General Assembly. We're talking about kind of at the national level. You mentioned ASEAN, at the regional level. What about the level we're at right now, speaking of sort of the rest of the week? What role do you see for institutions like the UN when it comes to creating these big global sort of governance regimes? What should and shouldn't the UN be involved in? To both of you, but we can start with whoever wants to take it. Go ahead.
I can go, I guess. Well, I think the UN could be tremendously important. I mean, it's sort of unparalleled in terms of cultural authority and sort of norm setting, and the ability to bring so many, like all of the different groups together, at least all of the different countries together, in a way that smaller groups aren't able to necessarily do. I think it's taken a couple of big important steps with the International Independent Scientific Council and the launching tomorrow, I guess, the Global Dialogue on AI Governance. So these I think need a lot of support in making sure that Independence Council stays independent and it talks about the right things, all of the important things. But I think that will not do it. That will not be enough if we really want sort of the level of global security and trust in AI that I think everybody wants. It's going to take more international institutions and sort of structures than are just going to come out of those dialogues. So I think there's going to be a lot to do. I think probably, it is hard to do things right now with the UN and in the international sphere, including all the countries. But I think smaller groups of countries, as your president has pointed out, can sort of form coalitions that are interested in pushing things forward and can get started, even if all the even some of the most important countries can't get on board at the moment. I think they will eventually, as the importance and power of AI sort of becomes prevalent and the obvious need to have a strong governance regime. I think the more we can get started at the international level, the better off we'll be.
May I declare a conflict of interest? I was a member of the high-level advisory panel on AI, so obviously. Nothing beats the legitimacy and the representativeness of the UN. I think you've mentioned a lot of that. I do think that the world needs a lot more capacity building in terms of a shared understanding of AI amongst the entire global governance community. It is very difficult to have meaningful conversations if there are a lot of policymakers who have themselves not used AI in a meaningful way. Your natural instinct is to be fearful and just say whatever. So we spend a lot of effort in our micro little Singapore to encourage civil servants to use AI. because we know that at some point they will have to govern it in their own domains. They're not necessarily from the digital ministry, maybe the healthcare or the education ministry, but you must understand its limitations and its potential. And I think if you then elevate it to a global level, you can have a much more meaningful conversations. Today, I think we are much more stuck. And I think that's where you also have coherence of interest between the public and the private sectors. The private sector is incentivized to let as many people use AI in as cheap and of course in a way that's as accessible as possible, so that people have a much better intuitive sense about it. You understand there's limitations. I'm not saying that they will just go away blindsided of how great this is, but I think that better confidence makes a huge difference.
So, Raymond, I know we're almost at time, but if you all will forgive me for re-upping, in a way, a question from the last panel. Singapore is also, you're close to China just by sheer proximity in many ways, but you also have a strong relationship with the US. How does that play out with sort of smaller countries like yours, but other countries in general, when you have a couple of countries, a few countries really dominate, and a few companies for that matter, really dominating the development of this technology? How do you navigate that?
You have to be quite sharp about what your fears are, right? I mean, for many people, what you want is just access to the best models in the most customized way. And if model A one day no longer works, I can go to model B, and it's not a problem, right? That's long. I mean, you can just API call a certain model. And then you have the questions around national security and the sensitive data. Those are also independent of country. You want to make sure that you have some air-gapped secure models so that you can use it for your national secrets. I think you want to be very clear about the reasons.
On that note, that's all the time we have. But thank you all, and thank you for a great conversation.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage SAP Global Head of Sustainability, Matthias Midert, for a conversation with FP's Executive Vice President, Alison Carlson.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, both those in the room and online. We've got a great group here in the room. I'd love to build on the important conversations that were had in the last few sessions and really focus in on how AI is really transforming systems and business in particular, and really would love to dive into your expertise. I mean, not only are we sitting here on the backdrop of UNGA, but it's also Climate Week. And we are following on our energy forum this morning, where we were talking a great deal about the energy transition, sustainability. And Matthias, I'd like to hear from you when you're thinking about AI, not only as an add-on, but a way to embed AI in business operations for greater efficiency, for greater sustainability. What is front of mind for you, and how are you thinking about that in the context of an environment where we need to eke out every kind of efficiency gain that we can, but also ensure that our business operations and organizational operations are sustainable?
Yeah, I think that AI and sustainability are basically two sides of the same coin. AI is like a powerful lens that cuts through this ocean of data for finance, for financial data on the one hand. But if we design it in a good way, this digital transformation, we can expand that and use AI also to be a powerful lens to measure and to look into social and environmental impact data. So if we do it right and really on purpose implement sustainability into the AI transformation, it will help to get sustainability a little bit out of this, how you call it, the add-on space, and put it in the center of the business. So to put it probably from a once-a-year sustainability report to real business decisions that are good for the business, for the planet, and for the people.
Can you provide an example of that? What would be a concrete example of ways in which AI has been embedded into business operations for that greater traceability and to be able to more effectively inform business-related decisions?
Well, a very simple example is when we look into suppliers, right? In the past, you looked into your ERP system, you had different vendors, and you've chosen the best mix of quality, price, and so on. With all the data that we now collect and with AI analyzing that, we also can include things like impact on environment, how does that support our net zero goal, or also how are these different vendors are performing in terms of human rights and other aspects. Yeah? And with AI, you can handle much more data and you can identify also areas where it has the most impact. Something that in the past, by doing it manually, you had no chance to do that really effective.
And I imagine there are elements of that as well that are vital to compliance, reporting, and really being able to be transparent as well about business operations.
That's right, but to be honest, for me, reporting and compliance is only one step. It should not be the end goal. Yes, it helps to compare, but what's much more important is to turn all these data not only into a report, but to transform it in actionable insights, to say, okay, if I have now all this data, it's a big treasure. So how can I make really a use of that data that really benefits the people and the planet, and not just, write a report that, probably talking about our own report with 100 pages, it's a limited number of people who will read these 100 pages. It would be a pain to have all that data and only use it to write a report.
Absolutely, completely agree. I'm wondering how you're seeing this really contribute then to scaling operations as they relate to sustainability. How are you seeing it have greater impact, translating through the embedding of the technology, informing decision-making, and then having a greater impact at scale?
What important is that you are there where the business decisions are taken. So it doesn't help if you have a very isolated sustainability department or silo somewhere in the company, in a headquarters, but all your business teams are just doing their business. So that's why we try to bring it into the ERP system, because that's where the decisions are taken, right? That's where you select a product, where you plan your logistic routes and all that. That's where it's happening. And adding the sustainability data there automatically, that will make a difference. So you need to bring it there where the people in the different business units are taking the decisions.
What are a few elements of this that you don't think are well understood from a broader audience about what's possible or what potentially are barriers to implementation of the technology in this way?
At the moment, I think a big challenge is that many organizations still work with average data, so that we are still at an early phase, I would say. So many suppliers, even of ourselves, they are not able to say, okay, this product has this carbon footprint and the other one has this carbon footprint, right? So many companies and organizations are still using averages, right? That says, okay, a laptop in average has that footprint. But if you work with that data, for me, it's toxic, because it leads to a situation where you draw wrong conclusions, and where if you do something right and you probably pick and choose an offering where you say, oh, this laptop, whatever, is circular and has much lower footprint and so on, you could not even report it. So I think a big important step is to get to actual data and enable all companies in the entire value chain to provide these primary data on a product level. That's for me one of the biggest hurdles to really make changes on a big scale.
On a related note, I'm curious, we're living in a world that's increasingly characterized by fragmentation. And when we're talking about data sharing, often words like data sovereignty come into play and fragmentation of international markets. And so when you're thinking about your work and being able to really embed the technology, but also share data across the value chain, how are you thinking about that in the present context that we're living in?
Well, I think partnerships are the key. I mean, first of all, it's important that we work together with regulators, that we have a common language, a common methodology, so that whatever, let's stay with carbon, we all follow the greenhouse gas protocol and that the AI results are comparable, right? Then that you work with peers and other companies across the network to agree on a data exchange standard. So that exactly what I said before, that everyone can rely on the data from the supplier, and the customers then can supply on your own. And you must help also your probably smaller suppliers to get ready and get mature in this area. Because for me, these partnerships are, as I said, are key. And without partnerships, I think AI will not be possible to transform these islands of data into really global impact. Without partnerships, we will have these islands that are separate and the impact will be minimum.
I think it's very well put, and shining a light on the smaller suppliers as well is vital, especially in so many countries around the world, and the power that could have to really transform the opportunity and access of small suppliers to broader businesses is immense.
Absolutely.
So thank you for shining a light on that. I know our time is short, but important topics to start thinking about, and again, leveraging the partnerships that are necessary to actually have impact at scale. So thank you.
Thank you.
Please now welcome to the stage MasterCard Chief Administrative Officer Richard Verma.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And also, I'd like to thank MasterCard for your partnership. We've been working in collaboration for about a year now with our FP Analytics team to produce some research on digital public infrastructure. And there are little cards that you should all have with a QR code that provides access to some of that research and looking at what is the state of digital public infrastructure around the world, what some of the opportunities are, challenges, et cetera. But I'd love to dive in right away with you to talk a little bit about the opportunity. Digital public infrastructure has tremendous, opportunities for countries around the world. And it's being rolled out in different ways with different strategies. And one of the things that we really focused on as part of the research was purposeful design, so that those projects that are not just technical in nature, but also have the potential to transform access to services are doing that, are increasing access and not exacerbating inequities. And so when you think about purposeful design as it relates to some of the projects that MasterCard is involved in, what are some of those core elements that are vital to really underpin strong systems that are equitable and increase access?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for covering this topic. So, when I travel around the world, and my last job as Deputy Secretary of State, going to nearly 80 countries in a couple of years, what you see is incredible promise in the digital economy. It is vibrant and it is everywhere, but you also see people being left behind. So some 30 to 35% of the world not yet connected to the internet, a similar number not participating in the digital economy. They are underbanked or don't have access to electronic banking systems at all. And that creates this gap and that creates this divide. So when we talk about building out digital public infrastructure, it has really got to be inclusive. We got to figure out how to bring people in, meet them where they are. That requires trust in the system. Also requires a fair amount of education. And so we've developed tools, again, to meet people where they are. So if you're a farmer and you've never had a bank account, we developed a program called Community Pass, where for the first time with a card, you can actually have a digital identity, you can get your benefits, you can transact with small businesses that you've never had before. And this starts to integrate people who have been off the grid for a while. So I think making sure we're inclusive in our approach, making sure the tools reach people. I'd also say the second thing I'd say is public-private partnerships. I spent half my career in government, half in the private sector. Love what governments can do at scale, big things, but I also know that the private sector is really good at innovation and risk-taking and research and deploying tools quickly. And I think it is bringing both sectors together along with our nonprofit and foundation colleagues and academia. This is how we have to solve this modern challenge of the digital economy. And I think I'm excited about this growth of digital public infrastructure and the role that we can play in it. MasterCard last year supported 155 billion transactions globally. We're available at 150 million merchants. We made a commitment 5 years ago to bring 1 billion people into the digital economy and to bring 50 million small and medium enterprise businesses into the digital economy. And we are going to meet that billion target later this year. And we've exceeded the small and medium enterprise by 15 million. We're at 65 million small businesses.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible progress. I'd like to pick up on something that you said about, different countries vary and there are opportunities for inclusion and public-private partnerships. So understanding there is a real opportunity for rollout of DPI around the world, but every country is different, right, as it relates to market structure, cybersecurity elements, DPI readiness, if you were to characterize it that way. And so I'm curious for you, what does a public-private partnership look like? If you could give us an example of that.
Sure. So this morning, we launched our first ever Digital Ambassadors Forum. We had ministers from countries from around the world. We had private sector representatives. We had civil society representatives to actually sit down and talk about exactly this. What does public-private partnership look like? How do we shape the rules of engagement? If you think about it, the technology has been racing at 100 miles an hour. The rules and the norms are trying to catch up. So we talked about, how do we not have this fractionalized system around the world? How do we have common standards? That's one thing. So that could be on privacy, that could be on cybersecurity, that could be on AI, that could be on crypto. Take your pick. So commonality of standards. But then again, real world applications. Transit. That's one example where we can help local governments and state governments. And again, when people are in crisis, so when Ukraine was first attacked by Russia and there was a flood of refugees into Central and Eastern Europe, a lot of those refugees did not know where they could go and live. And we developed an application that pulled together data about where there was available housing, where there was available job opportunities. It was a very smart tool, ended up being used by about 300,000 of the Ukrainian refugees. And that helped them find places to live peacefully and safely and get integrated into communities. I could go on and on through examples, but we need to come in where governments ask for our help, need to continue what we're doing in our core business of having the digital economy hum along. But again, meeting people where they are, I think, is key. And it is that public-private partnership that I think gets us to that place.
A couple more questions in the time that we have. Your example of Ukraine is a poignant one. And I'm curious, how are you accessing then, and how are you thinking about this regarding remote or rural communities and how DPI applies to them and how absolutely, these communities are vital and need access to public services. How are you thinking about making sure they're not left behind?
No, it's exactly the right question. And it is both an infrastructure question, it is a education issue. But again, it is deploying technological solutions, having countries and private sector work together. And I think about what our Center for Inclusive Growth does at MasterCard. It studies this problem, it analyzes this problem, but then it deploys real technical solutions working with governments around the world. So I mentioned Community Pass, I mentioned our work with Ukrainian refugees, but we have a lot of work for small and medium enterprise. We have a lot of work for entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses. The other thing that I would say that's important, it's not just being connected up to the financial system. It's not just moving assets from one place to another place. It is also showing up with rules and norms. So the great thing about what I think we bring to the table is guarantees for a small and medium enterprise that you will get paid. Guaranteed for the consumer that if there's fraud, they can actually protest that particular transaction. Guaranteed that if there's a dispute between the two banks, you can actually have a process to resolve that. So it's not just the technology, it is the rules that go with it to build up that ecosystem. Again, I'm excited about where this can lead. It'll take some, I think, courageous steps by governments and by leaders in the private sector. Grateful to work for a company that has taken those steps, and look forward to what we can do in the years ahead.
Great. And not to piggyback off of another event, but I do have to ask then, what were some of the key outcomes and next steps from this morning, and what do you hope to see going forward?
Yeah, so for the Digital Ambassadors Forum, we agreed next to actually hold the next Digital Ambassadors Forum in Africa or Latin America or Asia. We want to take it out into the regions that are facing these issues. Second, we agreed to have a kind of finite number of issues, not an unlimited number of tech and policy issues. So the ones I mentioned on privacy, on cybersecurity, on AI, how can we go forward? And then coming together with a set of recommendations for policymakers, for international institutions, for governments, so that we can really help shape that environment to build the digital economy of this century.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your partnership and for your leadership on this, and best wishes going forward.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Next, please welcome the Digital Cooperation Organization Secretary General, Dima Alyaya, GSMA Director General, Vivek Badranath, and Nigerian Minister of Communications, Innovation, and Digital Economy, the Honorable Dr. Bosun Tijani, for a conversation with FP's Rishi Iyengar.
Great. Thank you all for joining. Really looking forward to this panel and an important and timely discussion here at UNGA. We're talking about digital inclusion and the role of AI and kind of the impact that the AI development has on that landscape. Secretary General, I'd love to start with you. The organization you lead was created to very specifically address these questions. So can you just give us a sense of the landscape, even before we get to AI, in terms of just connectivity and access to technology? What does that look like right now, and where are the biggest gaps that you see around the world?
Well, first, thank you for having us. In the past decade, we have been working on bridging digital divide. And the more that we are moving in time, the more digital importance is becoming unbeatable. So now it's becoming a lifeline of how we live, we do business, and how we communicate. So it's as important as water and electricity. But unfortunately, we're not bridging that gap. The gap is increasing. And now with AI being introduced, we're looking at a new divide, which is the AI divide. So in a time where last year alone, investments in AI was $300 billion, only a handful of countries were involved in that investment. And that sends a message is that, well, who's going to benefit from these? Who's going to use that technology if 2.8 billion people still do not have accessibility to the internet and they're off-grid completely? And then when we look at bridging that gap, which is going to take more than $2 trillion, we're going to look at affordability of devices, as well as the affordability, availability, adoption, and also cybersecurity. So the landscape of digital divide is increasing in terms of availability as well as affordability. And with the AI, introducing these AI capabilities, that divide is increasing.
Dr. Tijani, I wanted to get your perspective of what it looks like in Nigeria, and as the economy minister, how do you focus on ensuring that the development of this technology within your country and that the dispersion of it is sort of equitable and people aren't getting left behind?
Thank you so much. I think we should probably take stock of where we are, which is probably why we should give GSMA and your members a round of applause for. Please do a round of applause for GSMA and all the telcos for.
And we still have a lot to do.
for the work they've done.
Not too early.
Yeah, no, I think if you look at Nigeria, for instance, telecommunication services is reaching about 92% of our people, basic telecommunication services. But in terms of broadband, I think we're still under 50%. And I think what that has done to economies, probably in the last, particularly our side of the world, in the last 10 to 20 years, is that we've been able to demonstrate how digital technologies can help leapfrog development and improve competitiveness. Which is a long-standing challenge for developing countries. You want to be more productive in your critical sector. But the challenge we're seeing at the minute, however, is this significant shift that is happening. That I think perhaps we're talking about it, but the framing is not strong enough to help us understand the urgency that is behind it. So when you look at the changes that artificial intelligence is about to bring to the world, the gaps that we're talking about in digital inclusion is actually going to change completely because it's going to be a totally different story. And I like to use the analogy of farmers. If you've been to many of the places where I've spoken, this is what I always use as an example. We consume a lot of maize in Nigeria. We feed our animals, livestock also feeds from maize. And the average maize farmer in Nigeria will get 2.5 tons from 1 hectare of land. The highest on the African continent is from South Africa, which is about 5 to 6 tons per hectare of land. There are farms in Brazil. I visited one about maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. There are farms in Brazil that are already doing between 10 to 12 tons per hectare. And it's not GMO. It's precision farming, it's connectivity, it's knowing where the seed is going, where the herbicide is going, and things like that. So that's going to have significant implications for the world because it will mean that despite the fact that Nigeria is probably one of the most youthful countries in the world, and agriculture is a major sector, that Nigeria will be better off importing maize from Brazil because there's no way Nigeria can be competitive. So that's the level of change that this new form of technology is bringing to society. And I know people often talk about the fact that we should participate so that we're not just consumers. The reality is that we don't even have the absorptive capacity to consume. We don't have the absorptive capacity to consume it. And this is the future challenge for GSMA and your members. Because if a continent like Africa is not moving away from being mobile first, there's absolutely no way we're going to participate in AI. The young people that will build AI applications will not build it on their phones. They're not going to build it on mobile-based connectivity. We need fiber optic network that is ubiquitous and that can reach every part of the country. We need affordable devices, which is not just phone. And it's not about moving to cloud phone. It's about moving to the sort of devices that people need to participate. We need academic institutions that understand and are participating in helping to ensure that AI can work for us. And we need regulations as well that is opening up significant aspect of our economies for AI to participate. So the urgency to reimagine what we invest in, the talent that we need to truly appropriate AI, is not something that we have time. We actually have to go after it really, really quickly.
Right. So just one quick follow-up. You said we need regulations. How are you thinking about bringing those regulations in the Nigerian context? And when you say we need regulations, are you talking about more kind of global multilateral regulation?
I think positive forward-looking regulation is what I'm talking about, because this phenomenon is moving so fast and too fast for most governments, actually, let's be honest. And the implication is that government is not in a position to truly regulate it. When I was appointed, what we did was actually we used AI to identify all the Nigerians in the world working in AI. So at the ministry, we know where they are. Yeah, because we downloaded all the academic publication on artificial intelligence. We use a name library to find them, and we know exactly who they are, where they are. And we brought 150 of them to Nigeria to help us design our national AI strategy. So that's the sort of thinking, because AI cannot just be managed by public leadership only. You need technical leadership, because most public leaders don't have an understanding of this phenomenon we're talking about. I have a bit of technology background, but I can't tell you that I fully understand the details. So we need to bring those technical people with clear understanding into the loop, and as we build our regulations. And I think the best way to also do that is to collaboration. So countries with clear understanding, we need to come together to ensure that we're actually front-loading the important things, that nations understand what they should prioritize. For instance, when we talk about large language model and inclusion, countries like ours shouldn't leave it to just come in to say inclusion is important. What are we doing about driving inclusion? We may not have access to GPU, but are we ensuring that AI can speak our language? We can do that. We can collect data. We can help train large language model. We've seen countries like Iceland that thought we're too small to start building our own thing and keeping it inside. And they worked with OpenAI to open it up. And they collected their data. Now they're sure that OpenAI models can speak their language and understand their nuances. Nigeria, just a few days ago, we just open sourced our large language model. It's the first government back on the African continent. Because we've looked at it that if we don't do that, we're going to get caught up in the competition around sovereignty and geopolitics. But the real conversation is, are we also focusing on the absorptive capacity for AI to help us drive productivity in our country? Those are two conversations. Both are important, but if you get sucked into who owns what and sovereignty, the reality is that you're actually not going to be consumer at all, because you won't have the absorptive capacity to use AI locally.
Right. Vivek, I wanted to bring you in. Your organization, as we've discussed already, has a lot of convening power on the private sector, but also on the public side. How do you approach sort of getting these companies to not necessarily abandon their kind of profit motives, but look at the question itself differently of who accesses their technology and how that access is distributed?
I think our industry, I mean, we've done a bit of a job of connecting 5.8 billion people, and the job is not over. I do share the minister's optimism that AI is indeed a transformational technology. We recently did a piece of work on trying to drive innovation in AI for development. So as I would say an RFP, 90 projects. And some of them, I mean, precision agriculture, the education space, health space, these are all areas where AI is not a luxury. AI is actually part of the answer. And these are solutions that come from the African continent and come through innovators who have looked at new business models. So I'd say AI is not a luxury, but for that AI, which is not a luxury, to be available to everyone, we need to finish the job on the usage gap. And I think without dampening the optimism, we still have 3.1 billion people for which we have built networks. So they're under coverage. They have, so I'm not even talking about those who are in remote areas where additional investment will be required and where proper models will need to be designed and where governments and operators are having dialogues where if you relax a bit the competition rules, you let operators cooperate, you can still continue to extend the available networks, bring fiber to them, and start to connect schools and start to connect localities and communities. But I'm talking about the 3 billion people, 3.1 billion people out of the 3.4 who are not connected, who actually have a signal. And there we look at the root causes of their being unconnected. And what do we find? First one, super mundane, very simple, smartphone accessibility. And so you're talking of a $40 device that would change the perspective. And so how do we ensure that we're able to make $40 devices? And we have the Affordable Handset Coalition together with many of our partners, including the ITU and a number of both operators and equipment manufacturers. We need to get that done. That's the first step. And we need to find the financing models that enable daily wage earners to be able to buy a $40 device on credit. Doesn't look like the most difficult task that the planet has to face, but it's taking a lot of time. Other factors that hinder the adoption and drive this usage gap, relevant content. And there, what the minister said is absolutely the heart of the question. You can put in as many devices as you want, if it's not in your language, or if it's not, or if it's written and you can't read, you miss the point. And then there is no reason for a daily wage earner to spend 18% or 20% of their income to buy a device that they can't use. The initiative that Nigeria just announced on the large language model that you put on Hugging Face, so as a common good, is one of the directions that we should fully embrace. I think we've reached the point where teaching a language to the LLMs is a common good. It's so the operator community has been working on this. I'm hoping that some of the initiatives they're already sharing. They're putting them out there because there's much more to be earned from training models that then can be used for inference by others than of keeping it as a competitive advantage for just one company. So language is super important, and I think a big direction of travel. And the third one is, of course, training. Training, and here I'm talking training of people who are not yet connected. I think we still have a lot to do in that area so that they can understand, not be too scared, avoid scams, learn how to carefully use their devices so that no negative consequences occur. So I think that's our usage gap program, and we have a very strong commitment from the whole industry on this.
Secretary General, I wanted to ask, in your position, kind of looking at the cross-section of this, who do you think bears that burden and that or that responsibility, rather? Where does it lie between the wealthier countries pulling up maybe the countries that don't have the same level of resources, the private sector? There are, as we've discussed earlier today, like a few companies that are really dominating the landscape of really developing these technologies. Is it governments? Is it sort of civil society? Where do you see that responsibility coming from? And or if it's shared, then how do you see it being shared?
Well, I do really believe that it is an ecosystem drive. Governments, private sector, civil society, and financial institutions together. The thing is that to bridge that gap and to find these solutions to level the playing field and balance, it's by disrupting multilateralism, looking at it from a different perspective, while the driver should be target-oriented and looked at in a way where what's the role of each part of that ecosystem. In DCO, we are looking at it being that platform that brings in all of the parties of the to drive and accelerate digital economy growth. And I'll give an example with AI, since we're talking about that. we're looking at a huge AI divide, not only a digital divide, but an AI divide. The countries that we represent are very diverse. And this is where we believe that when it comes to digital economy specifically, there's no one size fits all. Each country has its competitive advantage. The thing is that how do we identify what is that competitive advantage and how that competitive advantage could be a solution for a challenge for another country? And this is where we looked at AI in four main perspectives. First is identifying the need, the readiness of a country when it comes to AI. Is it going to be a consumer? Is it going to be a producer, an enabler, empowerer? So we have to identify that role that the country can contribute. The second is sharing and cooperating in terms of policies and regulations. Why should we reinvent the wheel? If something is working in a country and can be adopted in another, let's bridge that communication gap and let's make it closer and share the regulation and governance frameworks with one another. The third thing is infrastructure, and this is where it's really important. We have assessed all our member states, and we were looking at where is the investment. We have countries that are putting a lot of investment in infrastructure, but the thing is, they lack other elements, like, for instance, brainpower. They lack governance frameworks. They lack ease of doing business as well when it comes to digital trade and investment. And this is where we worked on an AI governance framework where we capitalize on the capabilities of the infrastructure of countries, like, for instance, the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait, while giving accessibility of that infrastructure to countries like Pakistan, Jordan, Morocco, and also Africa. Like Nigeria, and we're very blessed to have our member state here with us, one of our member states, our first African country to actually join DCO. And last but not least, which is skills. Making sure that we're creating a task force and a talent pool from within our member states to expand very freely from one country to another. So not necessarily all the countries have the same knowledge and the capabilities, and this is what we're creating, mobility for these talents to expand and to capitalize on the infrastructure in countries. I'll give one example of, for instance, Pakistan. 2 months ago, we've celebrated attracting more than $700 million to Pakistan because we assessed where does that investment go. And that data we provided to the private sector. So we bridged that gap and we made the investment in AI faster and we accelerated it.
Right. I wanted to ask you another question on something that Vivek brought up earlier, which is mitigating some of the harms that come from this kind of connectivity. I mean, I grew up in India, and I've reported from India. What happens a lot with kind of access to technology? You look at something like broad access to WhatsApp, for instance. There's a lot of the digital literacy gap where misinformation is an issue, and AI just kind of supercharges that. How do you combine the efforts to get people connected with letting them know somehow that not everything they see online is necessarily real or true?
Oh, true. Definitely. And that's why it was on the priorities of our member states, is that while we're bridging that divide between the countries, that we create a safeguard internet for our generations to come. We do represent 800 million in population as DCO, and 75% of that population is under the age of 30. So you would have very tech-savvy population, and I call them the innovators of the future. And we will have to make sure that they have accessibility to the right data as well, and credible data. And this is where we launched a ministerial council that looks at misinformation and compact and fake news. And we're working on now AI, or using AI to identify as well misinformation. but also we're working on standards with the private sector, where they are part of the discussion that would come to agreements between the private sector and the governments to work together to make the internet safer.
Oh, did you want to add something?
No, just to say, I think in the matter of scams as well as the matter of effective use of AI, I think it is a collective. Everybody needs to play their part. If you look at scams, the banks have to play their part. Operators have to support and give as much as they can to avoid these events. And the platforms also have to do their own part. So it's everybody needs to be happy to help. And indeed, not putting it on one party rather than the others is, I think, getting everybody to feel responsible is important. As an industry, we've launched a responsible AI framework as well, recognizing these forthcoming risks. They're still not completely prevalent, but for once, let's catch it before the bad news hits. 50 operators have already signed the responsible AI framework, and they're putting it in place, and it includes governance, it includes testing, it includes proof of results, and I think these are good practices that we need to continue to work on, and I think it's important to put these in place quickly.
Minister, what does that conversation look like in Nigeria of sort of mitigating those harms and the digital literacy gap that we just spoke about?
I think digital literacy is, for me, is actually the beginning, both skills and literacy of preventing harms of this technology. Like if you have a pool of people that are using a set of technologies that they don't really know much about, I'm sure we can all relate to probably our grannies, our granddads on Facebook and the kind of things they push. I think it's a function of knowledge, literally. Which is why we understand that part of the absorptive capacity for Nigeria will be a workforce that can help us apply it really smartly. That's why we're training 3 million technical talent. It's the largest technology talent accelerator program anywhere in the world. But we also have an aggressive target to get digital literacy up to 70% of our 240 million people, just so that people can have clarity in terms of what they're doing with the technology. We've worked with UNESCO, for instance, on ethics, understanding what we need to put in place, assessing what's on ground and what we need to improve. So we think it's evolving. It's evolving. But I think as the world is talking about this thing, let's also be clear that the opportunities for companies to still not do the right things is high because of the competition around AI. Everyone is focused on who's going to get there first, and that's ongoing. We shouldn't deceive people that most of the content you put on social media are not being used to train AI models. I think for those who use X, you probably know that that's the fact. Your content is being used, whether you agree to that or not. So I think for me, true protection for society will come from clarity, every nation knowing exactly where they stand. And that's why I think as much as we should be sharing regulations, we don't want nations to just copy and paste regulations. It's actually going to be much more dangerous than we can imagine. Because it's very highly technical, there's a temptation that if something has been done that is great in Nigeria, if I'm a neighboring country, I can just copy that. The danger is when you copy without asking deep questions about what AI means for your context, you're not going to be coming up with the best understanding of how to protect your people from it. We're all different. We have unique nuances that are important, and we need to understand that the beauty of AI is diversity. The ability of AI to truly understand all of us is what makes it a good technology. So every nation must be encouraged to get in. The last point on this is how many countries will just willingly outsource their defense to other countries? That's how you need to think about it, like the thinking around your defense. Only a few countries will do that for obvious reasons. Greenland, maybe to Denmark, for clear reasons, right? But they don't. It's not a decision you take without thinking thoroughly about it. You've thought of it. So that's the same level. AI is at the defense level. This is something that is going to literally control everything in your nation. So don't just copy the document that has been produced by someone and say that's also our own strategy. Ask deep questions.
Right. Well, an important discussion on a noble mission. So that's all the time we have. Thank you so much to our panel. Please join me in giving them a round of applause.
And now, please welcome to the stage Taiwan's representative to the United States, Ambassador Alexander Ta Rei-yu, for a conversation with FP's Ravi Agrawal.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Thank you.
That's a responsive crowd. That's good.
Yeah, we like that. We like interactive
No tomatoes
crowds.
or lettuces, please.
Okay, Representative Yu, it is great to have you here in New York and also at FP's Tech Forum. So let me start with a provocative question.
Okay, go ahead.
The conventional wisdom when we talk about China and Taiwan is that China wants to take over Taiwan militarily.
By all means, actually, yeah, but yeah.
And there are war games that, look at how that could happen. But, the reality is, given the choice, they would much rather take Taiwan peacefully, and they would do that, keeping intact all of Taiwan's amazing resources, human capital, tech, the economy, infrastructure, all of that. The provocative case could be that with a new administration here in America, which has not allowed President Lai to do his usual route through this country, and with President Lai's popularity really dwindling, that the peaceful option is now looking more attractive to Beijing. Your response?
I thought I was here to talk about AI.
I told you we'd have a provocative question to start.
Well, first of all, the People's Republic of China was founded in October 1st, 1949. And they recently had this huge military parade on September 3rd, which all you saw very impressive. A lot of new weapons. But in this display of arms, the message they were trying to portray, besides that they're a superpower, they have power projection on the world militarily, but also they were trying to say through their propaganda that they are the ones who fought World War II in China and the war against the Japanese invasion in China. That started in 1937. They were just a ragtag group of guerrilla groups back then. So the war was fought by the nationalist government back then. As you see the Flying Tigers, they were flying planes with the star, the sun, not the stars. So they're trying to change history, and they're also trying to claim that Taiwan belongs to them just because it's a Chinese, historically it was Chinese. But if that's the case, they should ask Vladivostok back from the Russians, because China lost Vladivostok at about the same time China lost Taiwan in the late 1800s. So it's just a bogus claim. And speaking of UNGA, the Chinese have been trying to use Resolution 2758 also as an international legal basis that Taiwan belongs to them, which is false because it doesn't belong to them. But by the way, what you mentioned about Taiwan being encroached by the mainland China, there's a joke saying in Taiwan that the best place to buy a house in Taiwan is actually near where TSMC plants are, because that's the place that will not bomb. They want to keep TSMC as intact as possible.
So we'll get to TSMC.
But anyways,
and I promise to get to tech. But the bulk of the question was...
The bulk of the question is, while there seems to be some, like Taiwan's being pushed aside, and there's this big rapprochement between China and the United States, the upcoming meeting in APEC, and so on and so forth. But Taiwan-U.S. relations, actually there's been no change. The U.S. is very clear on who we are, what we stand for. We have the same values. We are partners, especially if you talk about technology. And what PRC is trying to do to project its power around the world according to their values is not consistent with what the United States believes. So you mentioned about President Lai. Well, it was never announced, so it was never rejected publicly, but Those are small details, but I think U.S.-Taiwan relationship is very strong and ongoing.
Let me push you on that, and then I promise I'll come to tech. You've been in this job now for more than a year.
Almost 2 years. Yes.
Almost 2 years. I mean, two very different administrations in D.C.
Yes.
And you've lived through it. I don't know. I mean, to me, it doesn't seem that America's posture towards Taiwan is the same as it was a year ago.
Pretty much, actually, well, obviously, every government has its own distinct way of governing. We have to obviously get used to the current administration, how it does policy. But if you noticed, the United States, the Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Paparo, what he talks about in his speeches, the United States is very, very well focused on the possible crisis and dangers that may emanate from the Chinese aggression towards Taiwan or the region. We're not the only ones. There are issues in Japan, the Philippines, and Vietnam, and in other places. So we're just part of the whole problem that PRC is generating. And Taiwan's defenses, we are increasing our defenses. We're getting better trained, better equipment, but it's a defensive posture. The Chinese weapons are offensive in nature. So you can see who is the aggressor, who's the troublemaker, who's the one trying to prevent one from happening. Again, there are many flashpoints around the world. There's Ukraine, there's Middle East, there's South Indo-Pacific, particularly the Taiwan Straits. Taiwan is every day being surrounded by the Chinese planes, the PLA planes and ships constantly. Sometimes 12, sometimes 50, sometimes more, but it's a daily occurrence. It's sort of a scare tactic, but we are getting prepared too.
What do you make of the two things? One, there are reports that Trump might go to China this year for a summit, not confirmed, looking likely, I'm told. But the other is that America is now giving China some of the high-end semiconductor chips that it hadn't been giving even a few months ago.
You mean the H-20s?
The H-20s.
Yeah, which the Chinese are trying, they're actually warning the companies not to get them.
Yeah.
Because they're, well.
How are you viewing, though, when I look at the two things I just described, I see it as part of a trend line. How are you looking at that trend line from your vantage point?
I've said it before, actually, in your interview from Foreign Policy last week, that it is a good thing that China, PRC, and the United States are talking. Two powers in the world to avert any risk or misunderstandings. It's important. We don't want to see war happening or any conflicts happening because of misunderstandings or frictions from two sides. A lot of it is at stake. Many lives, but many world trade. Everything is at stake. So it's a good thing they're talking, but at the same time, I think the United States is also very clear on what the problem is and who is the adversary. And China is, in my book, clearly an adversary to the United States. Xi Jinping has said it himself. This is the time that he wants to realize the big China dream. And the United States is getting in the way. And PRC, in their view, rightly so, they're trying to undermine the United States at every corner because they want to overcome U.S. supremacy and become the #1 top guy in the world.
Let me ask you a more direct tech question this time, as promised. Over the last few years, it's so clear that a lot of energy around building new data centers is moving towards the Middle East. A lot of American foreign policy is based around how it can game out the future of AI. When Taiwan looks at all of these shifting pieces on the chessboard, what worries you?
Well, first of all, I want to say that when we talk about the upcoming technology, the surge of artificial intelligence, you want to talk about the development of AI without talking about Taiwan is like saying we're going to Mars without talking how you're going to make the rocket fly to Mars. Just look at what happened during COVID. Remember COVID, when it happened, all the cars being built in Detroit and Japan and Germany, they were being placed in empty lots. They couldn't be sold. Why? Because they lacked this little thing called a chip. And it was, lo and behold, made in Taiwan for some reason. It's not our fault because the car manufacturers did not order enough chips. So at that time, when the world was sealed, remember, we were all at home. So we were Amazon buying notebooks and laptops and phones, which also require a lot of chips. So all the companies producing chips in Taiwan were satisfying the orders for the phone companies or for the. So when the car company says, "Oh, we need 10 million more chips," I goes, "Well, okay, we'll give it to you in 2 years because the order is filled." I go, "Oh no, but we need." Okay, well. Imagine the same with AI now without Taiwan. What 60% of regular chips are made in Taiwan? And 95% of the super chips are physically made in Taiwan, not by a Taiwanese company in Malaysia or India. No, it is physically made in Taiwan. So you want to talk about AI without talking about Taiwan?
Yeah,
it's almost impossible.
It is definitely impossible.
But you mentioned about Middle East, and my advice is, again, it's a great thing. We need AI to be developed in a way that will benefit humanity. It's supposed to serve humans, to improve our lifestyles, our quality. How are we going to do that? We need a lot of people to be trained to do that. And we are in a very aggressive mode working with the United States to train people in Taiwan and United States. Talk about the H-1B visa, but no, we need our engineers in Taiwan because we're expanding, manufacturing in Taiwan in a very steep way. We need our position of plants in the United States that's also increasing. We need U.S. workers to man those factories. There's not enough of them, so we're frankly working between Taiwanese universities and U.S. universities all over the country to generate these STEM majors or electrical engineers so they can man these factories. There is quite a need. He said, well, are we going to miss the train because it's not United States, it's not Japan, it's not Taiwan? Actually, no. When I was ambassador to Paraguay some years ago, we set up a Taiwan-Paraguay technological university. We're training 100 engineers per year in Paraguay. Why? Is for them to catch this train. We're training the engineers, 5 years ago? Now there are 300 or 400 engineers in Paraguay. And there's right now a semiconductor conference going on in Paraguay between Taiwanese, Paraguayan, and people from the area. Why? Paraguay has lots of land. It's 11 times bigger than Taiwan. Lots of water and lots of energy. I think just one Itaipu plant has 70 megawatts of power. And that's exactly what they need. It's a lot of power. So we have to start with education. Again, we're working. Remember when President Biden, with this ITSE fund, was trying to include 7 countries that were not involved in semiconductors, but to involve them in the semiconductor education. I think that's worth continuing because it's getting more countries into the AI realm, and that's very important. The education part is very important.
Last question. I mean, America is clearly Taiwan's most important ally, right? When you listen to President Trump's speech at the UN today, where he, essentially railed against clean energy and doubled down on fossil fuels, for countries around the world, they take a message from that. He also railed against immigration. They take a message from that. And America's losing some soft power. One could also make the case that China is taking advantage of that in a variety of ways. Good debate to have. But I often see Taiwan as stuck in the middle here. How are you navigating this?
Well, we're not really stuck. We're an island the size of Maryland, and 2/3 are mountainous. So 23 million people live in what is a third of Maryland. Plus, and we have to make production for food. We have to produce chips for the whole world in this little piece of land. But we are United States' 7th largest trading partner, and we're probably the 21st economy in the world. So we may be small in land mass, but we are economically quite relevant, especially in the high-tech realm. President Trump announced the AI action plan in July. We also have, President Lai has also called for the initiative on called World Semiconductor Democratic Supply Chain Initiative. Basically, what it means is a non-red supply chain. Because why? Because again, on the AI race, in our view, we need to be in front of the other side, which is PRC and their cohorts, working together between Taiwan, United States, Japan, and other democratically in tune countries to make sure this AI is handled by countries and partners that do believe in the values that we do believe. PRC, again, they saw. We all saw this military might parade a few times ago. But PRC spends more money on internal control than on military arms. And they're using that technology to control its own people. If you think of 1984, Big Brother, well, that's what they're doing in China. And we don't want that in my country, to my children, to my friends. So having this non-red supply chain is important to have maintained AI superiority in the world. We went through this experience in Taiwan when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan 3 years ago. Taiwan government, we use 0 Chinese components, 0. Or starting from 4G, 5G, 0 Chinese components. But we don't limit what the private entity they use. Some of them use Chinese, Huawei or whatever, ZTE. The day Pelosi visited Taiwan, she arrived in the evening. During the day, all those panels, LCD screens at our train stations, at 7-Elevens, those who were Chinese, all of a sudden started broadcasting in Chinese, simplified Chinese messages. Pelosi's a witch, get out of Taiwan, Taiwan is Chinese, etc., etc. So they were hijacked by the Chinese someone in Beijing writing these messages. So we learned they all have backdoors, like it or not. So while the governmental system was safe, although we were attacked, cyber attacks also frantically by the Chinese in our government portals. But at least we were safe because it was 0 Chinese components. So imagine an AI with Chinese components. So all those countries are using Huawei in their 5Gs or ZTs. Well, you better, when they get angry, you better be careful. I'm serious.
That's a good answer. Representative Yu, we're out of time, but thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Real pleasure.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Foreign Policy's publisher and CEO, Andrew Solinger.
Hi, everyone. We made it. Thank you so much for joining us and for listening and participating in this great discussion that we've had today. I've got lots of notes and takeaways, but I'm going to read the room and keep them tight. I thought that was a fantastic discussion about Taiwan and its geopolitical importance as a center of chip development. I really enjoyed the Africa digital economy discussion around investment, infrastructure, local talent development. Fantastic. We talked about ransomware, a frontline threat, and how important that is, and how to make resilience and cross-sector coordination essential to protect critical systems. And of course, a lot about AI up and down. I thought it was a fantastic discussion. I hope you did too. I once again want to thank our strategic partners, GSMA and SAP. Couldn't do it without them. And additional support from the Future of Life Institute, MasterCard, McKinsey Global Institute, Microsoft, Regulating AI, and ServiceNow. They all really participated to the fullest, and couldn't thank them more. And I want to thank all of you in the room and all of you globally at home. We got some big spikes in our stream, and so I was really pleased to see all of you watching. And we thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you giving us this time during a busy week. So an applause to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And that concludes our program. We can